Hello, this is Mark Millardi, and this is Unprecedented, the first of what we're hoping will be an ongoing podcast series, which will explore the literally unprecedented times we find us in from a from a geopolitical standpoint. We're really facing challenges that we've faced very rarely in our history as a nation, and my intention is to give my point of view on the subject at hand with a lot of historical context. So, first, let me step back and just tell you a little bit about who I am and where I come from. Originally from New York, I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, a borough of New York just outside of Manhattan. From a decidedly and proudly blue collar family, a union family. My father, God bless him, who is still with us, 93 years old, he was a city bus driver for many years, 35 years. He drove a city bus across the Bronx, Manhattan, Harlem, etc. My mother was a bank teller. So proudly blue collar parents, again, a union household. My father has been a union man his entire life, has always voted the Democrat ticket up and down the line. I myself, once I got into the business world, went down the Republican route. So I've been a lifetime registered Republican up until the advent of the Trump administration. And we'll get back to that in a second. So, with my upbringing, one of the real early influences for me was the study of history. I've been fascinated with all facets of history since I was a young boy. I've read profusely about history. I sit here amongst my library of literally over 1,000 volumes, my own personal research library, nonfiction content, covering largely the time period from the Mexican-American War in 1840 all the way through Vietnam, the Gulf Wars, etc. So in my love of history, as I said, I've digested it profusely. I read profusely. In my travels, what I've found is one of my influences early on, in addition to my parents who instilled in me this love of reading, and my dad who instilled in me this love of history, one of my other influences was my Uncle John, John Anthony Esposito. He was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He married my mother's sister, so he was my uncle on my mother's side. Uncle John, as I call him, recently passed away, not 8 weeks ago, I think it was, at 102 years old. He was born in 1914, which was the first year of World War I. Lived to be 102. He was in the 4th Division of the U.S. Army during World War II. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last stand against the Allies. He was wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. He earned a Purple Heart. He was out on reconnaissance detail late at night in the snow during the Battle of the Bulge. He gave out the code word to which the people approaching him were supposed to respond in kind. They didn't. They didn't give him the code word, so he knew something was wrong. They shot at him. He was hit. He went down. He had the wherewithal to take a hand grenade, pull the pin, throw that hand grenade at the enemy. The firing stopped, so he either got them or they ran away. He bandaged his own wound, literally, and he crawled back to the aid station. So a true war hero, a genuine war hero. He was then sent on to England for the balance of the war, and as I mentioned, went on to live a long and fruitful life to the ripe old age of 102. So Uncle John was another profound influence on me, both from the standpoint of my love of history and from the standpoint of reading, the importance of reading. He was one of the first people that would bring books over the household that, again, started on what has become for me a lifelong adventure. Also, as a boy, a lot of you might remember a service called Scholastic Book Services, SBS, in grammar school, by which you could sign up and you could purchase, X number of books each semester. Now, while a lot of other kids were, reading works of fiction or reading Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, whatever they might have been reading at the time, here's what I was reading. These are literally the first two books I ever remember purchasing through Scholastic Book Services. One of them being The Battle of Britain, the story of the Blitz during World War II over Britain, how Britain survived the Blitz and went on to repel the German invaders. That was book number one. Book number two is a short biography of General George S. Patton, the fiery U.S. commander in the European theater in World War II. These were literally the first two books. They still stand at the heart of my collection, proudly in my collection. These were the books that got it all started, and I think gave an early indication of, if you will, charting the course of my life in terms of that exploration of history. So, with that background, I mentioned that I became a Republican. So I am, truthfully, up until a month ago, 2 months ago, I was a registered Republican, a lifetime registered Republican. With that in mind, I've always voted with my head and with my heart based on the issues at hand at that point in time. So I never strictly voted a Republican ticket, irrespective of the issues. I voted on the issues. So as an example, I voted for Ronald Reagan, Republican ticket. I voted for George Bush the older, George H.W. Bush. I voted for his son, George W. Bush, once. The second time I voted for Al Gore because I was upset with the policies of George Bush towards the end of his first term. I voted for Barack Obama. So again, I voted for Mitt Romney. So I voted for Obama the first time. He lost me when the Gulf oil spill was going on for months and months, and that what ballooned into an oil disaster in the Gulf. That's what dissuaded me from voting for Obama. The second time, I voted for Romney. So along comes Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and I found myself unable to even think about voting for Donald Trump for a variety of reasons that I'll be getting into in depth, but essentially, it became a seminal moment for me when Donald Trump was put forth as the candidate of the Republican Party. To me, it made a very profound statement about where the GOP was, where the GOP is as a party, where the GOP is going, and the fact that they were embracing Donald Trump as their spokesperson, as their poster child, if you will, given all the baggage and all the persona of Donald Trump, which he's been on TV my entire life. I came from New York. I grew up, if you will, in his city. His life was very exposed, very out there, television media personality. We knew a lot about Donald Trump, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in fact, a lot of ugly, if you will. The fact that the Republican Party took that upon themselves and made him their standard bearer is really what led me to this microphone today. There was a seminal moment last year as the 2016 U.S. presidential election campaign was kicking into high gear. There was a moment early on in that cycle where I found Donald Trump very intriguing. I will say I liked the fact that he was from New York, a fellow New Yorker. I liked the fact that he was a businessman, a business person. I liked the fact that he was decisive. I liked the fact that he spoke his mind, that he put himself out there, which was, all of those things were not characteristics of politicians conventionally. So I liked the fact that he was unconventional, that he was a true outsider who seemingly would bring the principles from the business world to bear in elected office. That was all very appealing to me very early on in the cycle. So in the early stages of the primaries, I found myself rooting for him, as did my wife. We were tracking with him. There was a point in the election cycle where clearly, in my estimation, and the estimation of my wife, who will attest to this, he went off the rails. He began to expose himself. I think we're well familiar with those events. The Access Hollywood hot mic recording of him, talking about women the way he was talking about them, more or less openly admitting to, being a serial abuser of women, if you will. His mocking of the handicapped reporter, physically mocking him in front of an audience of thousands and millions. I found those kinds of actions repulsive, truly repulsive on his part. And to me, those are the things that began the true unmasking of him. And what I began to see was an individual who was not in it for the right reasons, who was largely in it to build his brand. Issues be damned, public be damned. He was going to, put forth his personal agenda, and he was going to go out and tell individual groups pretty much exactly what they wanted to hear, but with no intention whatsoever, in my estimation, in delivering against those promises, and frankly, no real moral fiber or or grounding that would enable him ultimately to be the kind of leader that this great nation truly needs. So I'll end on that note saying that that's essentially what has brought me to the microphone. So again, as I started out saying, my intention with this podcast series is to speak to the political issues of the day, the truly unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in from a political, from an international, and from a geopolitical standpoints, and to use historical context to reflect back on various points of history that are particularly relevant and that bear upon the things that are happening today, as a way of hopefully helping myself and helping all those within earshot of this broadcast to understand, to contextualize a little bit more why what's happening is happening, and hopefully together to begin to chart a path, frankly, out of this mess that we as a nation have gotten ourselves into. So I hope you'll enjoy what I have to share with you. I would invite you to stay with this series on an ongoing basis. I would invite you to comment upon what you're hearing, good, bad, indifferent. Let me know how you feel. If you have issues of particular resonance with you that you would like me to address in the process of doing this political op-ed series, if you will, let me know what those issues are. I've got a lot of things I'd love to talk about, a lot of things that I can draw upon historically to bring to bear, but that doesn't mean I've got all the answers or I've got all the issues well chronicled. So I want to reach out to you to help me in that regard. Tell me what you want this series to be, and hopefully I'll live up to your expectations and you'll take value away. So again, this is Mark Millardi, and this is Unprecedented, and see you next time.